on rehypothecation. Happy to chat about what's going on with, what's going on with COMEX, or whichever way you'd like to take this.
Yeah. So the next step, that is kind of the next step. What is going on with COMEX? What can we expect from what you're seeing on your end?
So, a lot of the things that I've talked about with you kind of set the stage just briefly. And we talked a lot about over the years how gold was revalued or reclassified as a high quality liquid asset, or a tier one asset, as far as central banks were concerned. And this was one of the overreaching reasons why they have been the largest buyers of gold for literally since 2017. They've pretty much been on a buying spree. But one of the things that has been overlooked by a lot of the mainstream, or a lot of the people even in this industry, is not only have the central banks been wickedly buying and setting records almost every year for their purchasing, using the suppression of the paper markets through this rehypothecation or naked shorting, driving down the price, but they've been standing for delivery in a very meaningful way and repatriating all of their gold from the New York Federal Reserve and the Bank of England, where most countries have left it there for the better part of 50 years, because it would give, not only would it be safe in a Western jurisdiction, supposedly, but it would also give direct access to the LBMA and to the COMEX. So New York Fed would hold it, and we could go into the COMEX, and the Bank of England would hold it for the LBMA. We've seen over 45 countries bring back their gold from these two institutions. We saw India recently. They bought more gold in the first few months of 2024 than they did in the entire year before. And then they brought it all home, along with over 100 metric tons that they've had at the Bank of England since 1991. So we are seeing a tremendous amount, and have been since 2017, gold accumulation and repatriation. And we've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about the fact that as stupid as the previous administrations have been by suppressing the price of metals, it's played into the hands of the BRICS nations, the countries that have been standing for delivery, instead of buying treasuries. It's very easy to see that as an example, over the past 25 years, gold has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury, but it doesn't have the sanction risk or the inflation or default risk that we have seen recently with the U.S. Treasury become more and more an issue, especially the sanction risk and outright theft, using the Russian $5 billion in assets as an example. That this belonged to Russia. We took it, we stole it, we defaulted on it. It is not our prerogative as the world reserve currency to pass judgment on who's right and who's wrong. I'm sure there are a lot of countries out there that would think our actions, like in Iraq, where we invaded them and destroyed their country, ultimately under false pretenses, we're still there 21 years later, occupying their country. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would think that a lot of countries that maybe we're not the proper ones to pass that judgment. It should be for world opinion, but yet we did. We confiscated, defaulted, and stole $5 billion in Russian treasuries that were U.S. treasuries that the Russians owned. And worse yet, we gave it to a country they were in the middle of a war against, in the form largely of weapons, enriching the military-industrial complex. That's just dirty. It's wrong. And that's a line that's very tough to come back from. And this is the reason you've seen so many countries let all of these treasuries that were expiring on their balance sheets roll off. And then instead of re-upping it, they're buying commodities like gold. That's all been very well documented. And that should kind of be the baseline here as we talk about what's going on. But since November, I think it's fair to note that the United States has become a net importer of gold. Now, my whole career, they were net exporters. Like everyone would always say, that gold's leaving, it's going to China or to India, wherever it's going, it's never coming back. And since November, now he wasn't in office, Trump wasn't in November, he won the election. And my guess, much like in 2019, when the BIS, Bank of International Settlements, reclassified gold as tier one, if we go back 2.5 years, after 5 years of nothing but central bank selling, we see the Bundesbank make a big deal about getting their gold back. from the Fed, and in 2017 they did. And very shortly thereafter, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, the Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, Bank of Austria, all these banks said, Hungary, give us back our gold. And they did. And then the next year in 2018, those banks who had been net sellers bought more gold as a group, more than they did in the previous 60 years combined, and then doubled it in 2019. And then miraculously, the BIS reclassified gold tier one. In other words, my feeling is they were told, you get your gold back, start buying it, we're going to reclassify it. Much like what we see here. Since November, we've become a net importer. My guess is Trump has been rattling the bushes. Everyone is believing it's about tariffs. It's not about tariffs. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they have brought in roughly 13 million ounces of gold and close to 50 million ounces of silver since November, which has moved from London to the United States vaults in COMEX. And to give you an idea of just the size of what we see happening right now, for the delivery for February, the February delivery contract is historic. In fact, as I mentioned, it's the biggest delivery in the history of the COMEX. 59,296 contracts stood for delivery. Who's got almost 6 million, enough money to buy 6 million ounces of gold? And 50 million ounces or thereabouts of silver, or excuse me, 13,735,000 contracts at 5,000. I take that back. 13,735,000 ounces. That's 2,747 contracts at 5,000 ounces apiece stood for delivery in silver. And these are massive delivery amounts standing for a particular month. JP Morgan delivered, or is set to deliver for the February contract, $4 billion in gold. And they have been very vocal about Blythe Masters, who used to run their desk, said, look, we don't buy it for ourselves. It's for clients. What client has $4 billion? I mean, could it be the Treasury or the Fed? I don't know many people that would drop $4 billion on gold in a client account for JP Morgan. This is very real, but it becomes even more real.
The same people that spoofed the gold market.
Right.
They got fined. How much was it? How much
they got fined
like?
$920 million, which is, I'm glad you brought that up, because it always bothered me that they paid the largest fine that the Justice Department had ever handed out to that point of $920 million for manipulating the metals market. And that year, their trading desk made $1 billion. Their metals desk, they paid $920 million fine, or $930 million fine, whatever it is. And so they walk away up 70 or 80 million. A couple of their traders went to jail, including Michael Nowak, their head trader. They're in essence slapped on the wrist and still allowed to be the custodian of the world's largest silver trust, SLV. But just recently, somewhere around the time—
They're still there.
Yeah, they're still doing it. But somewhere around the time that we became net importers instead of net exporters, JP Morgan took over custodianship of GLD, which is very ironic. It used to be held by HSBC Bank. So you now have JP Morgan and BlackRock running custody for the world's largest silver trust and one of the largest gold trusts in the world, in two vaults that JP Morgan owns, one in London, one in New York. They hold more gold than the majority of all the G20 countries. I've always said to people that instead of confiscating gold like Roosevelt did over my shoulder, my feeling is that they would take the ETFs, that they have massive stockpiles of gold and silver that are attracted by financial advisors not wanting to relinquish money under management to buy physical gold from you or me. So instead, they would recommend GLD and SLD to keep it under management. So you have these huge stockpiles of gold held by the criminal cartel banks. And if you read the prospectus, it says you can't take delivery. You can only be paid, in dollars, and which I'm going to talk about in a second, because there's something going on about that. And then we'll get to a couple other really big points. But so they could look at the world in the face and say, well, what? And we closed the two accounts on a Friday night. Whoever had $1 million in each account, well, that's now in their money market, and they had $2 million in there, and we didn't break any laws or infringe any civil liberties. In fact, the prospectus gives us the right to do this. So recently, as the price of gold has shot up, we've seen something very interesting, and the talking heads seem to talk like they know what's going on. In fact, they have no clue what's going on. And they said, well, there's been a lot of selling out of GLD as the price has been going up, and we would attribute that to things like interest rates moving higher, or a stronger dollar, or profit taking, or the Trump risk on trade, or whatever it is. And in reality, that is nowhere near what it is. What it is, in my mind, is big players are cashing out before a potential exposure to what's really happening. These are very wealthy elites, central banks, governments who have helped fund GLD and SLV, and they are allowed to do what's called share redemption, where they take their shares and turn them in. So it looks like people are selling, but in essence, they get to pull out the gold and the silver. It's called a basket. And, you're talking, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars you have to be able to have to pull out the basket. So it would be largely hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central commercial banks that are doing it. So, you see JP Morgan take control of it, then all of a sudden 16 tons leave the account. 16 tons left GLD. Now, the CNBC would say, yeah, that's 16 tons worth of shares that were sold and reallocated to NVIDIA or something else. Bullshit. That's 16 tons worth of gold that were redeemed for shares by the insiders. So you have share redemption going on. You have JP Morgan controlling these massive trusts. You have the U.S. being net importer of gold for the first time that I can ever remember, ever. And then you have the largest deliveries we've ever seen in the history of the COMEX. Now, that metal, we're also seeing it come from Asia, by the way. It's coming from all of the Asian exchanges, not just London. But a couple of points to talk about regarding London. They are a T+1 settlement exchange, meaning the trade day Monday is T, then +1 is Tuesday. That's settlement. You should have your metal delivered on its way to you on Wednesday, T+1 delivery. And it's now T plus about 8 weeks. There's that big of a backlog. That's, in my mind, a default. And can you imagine you need it for something, for whatever it is that you need it for, and you want it, and you're expecting to get it within a couple of days, and they say, sorry, 8 weeks minimum, 6 to 8 minimum. That's a very, 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 very big problem. And when you look at, for example, silver on the LBMA, they have 800 million ounces within their vault. And of those 800 million ounces of silver, 500 million belong to the ETFs. That leaves a float of 300 million ounces. They trade 290 million ounces per day. They trade the entire float every day, but they say that those numbers are at least 10 times understated because they only post the final settlement numbers. So if that's true, they're trading, in essence, 3 billion ounces of silver per day on a 300 million ounce float. That's 3.5 times annual global mine supply. The majority of all of those trades are naked paper. It's about 2.5 times annual global mine supply in gold. Again, all paper. So these people that are, or banks or institutions standing for delivery, it may not be there. And there's a scurry and a scramble. And now they're saying, well, it's refining time because COMEX takes 100-ounce bars and the LBMA is 400, and we're so backed up we can't get it out fast enough. That's all a bunch of horseshit, as far as I'm concerned. And it's